This is Made in America with Neil Asbury and Rich Rothman.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, the world turns. And, every week, when we think it couldn't get any worse, my goodness, we keep setting new lows. This baby formula thing, we're going to talk about it in just a little while, but I mean, that's really scary. I mean, that really, really is. You see these empty shelves, the moms, literally, getting into fights. And think about it. Their children, their babies, are being impacted. And our government is caught so nakedly, unable and unprepared to deal with something so fundamental, the health of our children. And mom, mom, don't mess with mom. That is that's a recipe for disaster.
That's a trigger.
Right?
And we learned that. You saw that in the last round
goodness.
of elections. And when you mess with parents, particularly Mama Bear, you're in for a big. But listen, my mother was a tough New York woman, and she took nothing from anybody. She was a real tough woman. Do not get between a mother and her child. Not a good thing. But this is a very sad thing to discuss, and we'll go into it later. But when you shut down a 40% or 48% manufacturing supply in the country of anything, and you don't think you can connect the dots going forward, then you've got a big problem. Then you don't understand leadership. Because if you do this, you have to do that. You have to see the consequences. And that's what the scary thing is, Neil.
Well, talking about consequences, we are very capable of solving our energy problem here in this country. And reverting back to very competitive energy prices for our vehicles, for our homes, for our businesses, and all the materials that come from the petroleum industry that go into our manufacturing. I mean, we're capable of doing that. We could be self-sufficient. We could be exporting to our allies and really making Russia irrelevant, but we don't do it because of our own government, not because of anything holding back the wisdom and the passion and the energy of the American entrepreneur. They can solve anything. We can solve this, but we're just not allowed to do it. We're not allowed to win. We're not allowed to win.
And you're right.
What did they say in Vietnam? Please let us win. We could win. We're not allowed to win. Right now, we are not allowed to win.
Winning. They were on the cusp of winning. And Kissinger negotiated.
We are not allowed to win. And here we are in today's world. We're not allowed to win in this energy crisis.
Well, imagine, and we're going to get into this with Jim in just a second, if we had manipulated the political world stage to the point that it became impractical or foolish for Russia to go into the Ukraine. Look what we would, first of all, we would have saved $40 billion just this week alone. So much could have happened in such a better fashion without bullets. It just could have been done, and we just didn't do it. That's a sad part.
We didn't do it.
No.
Well, Rich,
I'm done.
We're gonna introduce our guest here. We're very pleased to have with us James Colman, who's a professor of law at the Southern Methodist University, located in Dallas, which, by the way, Rich, is the home of the George W. Bush Presidential Library, and I was honored to speak there a few years ago. And a beautiful, beautiful place. James, welcome to Made in America.
Thank you. It's great to talk with you.
So, let's talk about sanctions. Everybody is talking about sanctions. We're going to bring Russia to its knees. We're going to have these sanctions. Do sanctions work? And is Russia really being damaged by these? Are there other outlets for their oil in this particular case? Just sanctions. I mean, sanctions, do they really work?
Well, they can do a little bit, but in some ways we've been holding back on sanctions, and we have done that a lot of times going forward. So, one thing that you mentioned earlier is that there were opportunities earlier to limit Europe's dependence on Russia that we really didn't take. And one of those was before we didn't really implement we actually dropped the kind of serious sanctions that we had used during the previous administration to prevent Nord Stream from going forward. And so, some could argue that as a result of signaling that we didn't mind that Europe was going to be becoming so dependent on Russia, Russia sort of thought it maybe had a green light. Now, since then, we have implemented some sanctions. We haven't implemented very substantive sanctions. So we said we're going to stop importing Russian oil, but one of the great things about oil is it's very easy to transport, and so if we don't import it, somebody else does. Now, apparently, we're considering more stringent sanctions. We haven't put those in yet, But to really be strict, we'd have to limit other countries from taking oil as well, so that Russia can't just sell its oil to another party.
Well, the thing that intrigued me, and you hear this every week, people criticize on either side of the conversation, and that is that, well, the timing of the sanctions, and there's a very good, I used to be in debate at Syracuse, so I remember jumping from side to side of the table and picking up my chair. But the timing, James, talk to us about the timing of the sanctions. Wouldn't it have been better, do you think, or do you think, let me just do it in an agnostic way, do you think it would have been better to have the heavy sanctions prior to them invading en masse, as they did, as opposed to waiting till after the fact and saying, now you're in trouble, buddy. Now you're really in trouble. Sort of like what my mother or father would say when I was a little kid. Now you're in trouble. It was after the fact. I did it already. I already spilled the paint. I did whatever I was supposed to do. They invaded. Now they've done it. How do you pull them out? How do you pull thousands of troops out after they've done it? So what do you think about that? I'd like to get your opinion on that. Timing.
Yeah, I agree. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't have sanctions now, because really what the sanctions are doing is two things. One is they're weakening Russia, and hopefully that pays long-term benefits. And also they're trying to send a signal, not just to Russia, but also to China and other countries that could be considering invasions, that no, you will be punished significantly. So they still have a benefit, but they certainly would have been better if they had been implemented earlier. And I do think that the Biden administration's decision to drop the most serious sanctions that had been imposed on the Nord Stream pipeline may have suggested to Russia that they wouldn't pay too steep a price. And, if we were going to implement those sanctions, it probably would have made more sense to implement them earlier. And, I think maybe, who knows, maybe even in fact, after the 2014 invasion during the Obama administration. So, there have been several probably earlier times when those sanctions could have been more severe and convinced Russia to take the kind of action it's taken now, because I do think you're right. Given the number of Russian lives that have already been sacrificed in this terrible war, it may be now difficult for Russia to kind of rethink it and pull back. It would have been better if we'd been able to convince them to pull back from the brink before they committed this level of forces.
Yeah, James, let's talk about just the hypocrisy of this whole thing. It's just startling to me. President Trump, he was crucified by the U.S. media when he wanted to stop the pipeline that was running from Russia to Germany. And he was very, very tough with, at the time, Chancellor Merkel, and saying, hey, look, you have American troops over there. We're defending you, yet you're building pipelines to Russia and becoming
you're giving business to Russia.
So dependent on Russian energy, and it's the American troops that are there protecting you, and you're sending all this money over to Russia. And, this just isn't right. The Russians are using this to build military weapons to fight against Americans, and you're funding it, and we're there to support you. And you got to stop that. That's no good. He was crucified for that position in the American press. Oh, you're pushing away our allies, and now the relationship with Germany and the United States, it's terrible, and NATO. But he was right. He was right. Then when President Biden comes on the stage, what does he do? He shuts down the Keystone pipeline because he doesn't like pipelines, but then he allows the Nord Stream pipeline to go forward. And now look at it. What a mess. The hypocrisy. James, the hypocrisy. Can you explain this hypocrisy to me?
It doesn't make a lot of sense. So, in fact, and I think you've seen a number of Democrats express frustration with it as well. Senator Manchin yesterday said that his frustration with the administration was at an all-time high, because in the middle of this war, which has been driven by energy insecurity and Russia's feeling that it had the energy power to do whatever it wanted on the European continent without any recourse from our allies. At the same time, the administration continues to do everything it can to stop domestic production of oil and gas, which, is the one thing the world is looking to give them an alternate source of energy to get through this crisis. So, no, it's extremely frustrating and makes no sense. The best sense I can make of it is that there's a politics aspect to this, which is that I'm not sure that there are parts of the Biden administration that I think realize that we need more domestic production to increase the world's energy security, but there are also parts and, important parts of the base of the Democratic Party that just don't want any new production of oil and gas in the United States, and they're willing to suffer some consequences to avoid that oil and gas production. And so far, I think the Biden administration has been favoring those aspects of its coalition, but you can see the Democratic coalition starting to break up over this issue because I think, a lot of voters and even, so a lot of members of the Democratic Party have serious concerns about our failure to produce more oil and gas domestically.
Yeah, suffer the consequences. Boy, are we suffering the consequences. Hey, James, thanks for being on the show. You've been a great guest. James Colman, a professor of law at the Southern Methodist University in the great city of Dallas. James, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Coming up, Dr. Rich and I still have a lot more to talk about. Stay with us. This is your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host, Dr. Rich Rothman. Rich, as we just discussed a moment ago, I'm watching with horror this unfold with baby formula. Mm-hmm. And, just in our country, you would never, ever expect
21st century,
like
the United States.
There's no baby formula.
They're talking about a lack of baby formula in the White House on TV. Unbelievable that we could have that.
And you think on top of all the other supply chain issues that we've had, all the other logistics with freight and ports and container ships and trucks and railroads and all of that just kind of collapsing, the energy market collapsing, the stock market collapsing, interest rates going through the roof, and now there's no baby formula. So, Rich, can you explain to me how this happened? I mean, why do we have no baby formula?
Well, here's the deal. When you take 40 to 50% of a product, a manufactured product, you're in manufacturing, off the market, and it's a required product that goes across the board with every baby practically in the United States has some form of formula. And you take that away, but then you don't bring forth a leadership idea on how you're going to replace that, because you're taking something that's food. You got to have food. Babies need food every day. They eat. A
necessity.
An absolute necessity of life. This isn't a luxury. This is a necessity. But you don't have a plan on where to go to find the difference. And the differences exist, Neil. They exist in Canada. They exist in Europe. Nestle can provide it. Dannon Yogurt Company, the parent company, could provide it. But they didn't do it. So the problem is, Neil, back in October, there was this discussion that there was bacterial infection, and they thought some babies got sick as a result of that in the Abbott facilities. Okay. The FDA goes in, they shut them down. Shut them down. That's in October. Then you have October, November, December, January, they start talking about it again. January. So think, October, November, December, 4 months practically. Not quite, but let's just say 4 months. Well, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. 3 months.
So all the supply now is being
gone.
All the inventories and everything is gone, but there's nothing else being produced.
There's nothing going into the system except that was in the system for the last few weeks, and that's going to get eaten up literally really quick. So come February, the administration admits, which we'll learn about this in a little bit, that, we acknowledge the fact that 40-some-odd% of the supply is out there. There's a problem. We need to do something about it. Except, wait a minute, Neil, what month is this? May? So in April to May, they start taking this pretty seriously, because all of a sudden, there's a lot of crying babies around the country and crying mommies around the country and crying daddies around the country.
And fist fights in grocery stores.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the one thing that cuts across and changes society, Neil, is famine. Famine, it's one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Think about that. Is famine. Famine produces very bad things. Famine produced a Russian Revolution in 1917. Famine produces other problems in China with Mao Zedong. It's unbelievable. So here you have a situation that they took all this off the market, and nobody Not even Pete Buttigieg, who you would think would have been hip to this, the Secretary of Transportation, because he had a child. He and his, husband had a child. So I'm really wondering now, do they have the Similac that they need? Do they have the manufactured baby product that they need? He certainly should have been knowing about it. And you'd think he would have said something to the president and say, hey, listen, we took 40-some-odd% of the Similac and everything off the market. You better do something about it. And no one did. So when no one does anything, Neil, nothing gets done. And therefore, you wind up in the situation you're in right now. And then you got a problem because you're not manufacturing it. And you've used up everything in the pipeline. Bad news.
Well, let's take a quick listen to Tucker Carlson here on something that he had said this past week.
If you've got food shortages, you've got a potentially destabilizing problem on your hands. And now we do have food shortages. They're real, as Joe Biden predicted. As of tonight, at least 26 states are reporting that half their retail stores are completely out of baby formula. That would include the states of Texas, Tennessee, Missouri, and Iowa, and many others. So these are major population centers without enough food for newborns. In Memphis and Nashville, 52% of stores have no baby formula.
So, Rich, we got half of our states with no baby formula. I mean, this is like incredible. I mean, it's like major American cities.
It's self-inflicted.
No baby formula.
It's self-inflicted.
Incredible.
The problem is this could have been corrected if you had a person with a business background. They would have done what they had to do to make it happen so nobody would starve. Children would not be going hungry.
You're looking into the future. Let's listen to this. Also a clip from Tucker Carlson. He goes on to explain more.
You would think the Biden administration would do something about it, and they certainly could if they wanted to. They could do anything. These are the people who claim to have the power to control global weather systems, the power to bend human biology to their will. So nothing is beyond the scope of their powers. And yet in this particular case, Joe Biden is in no hurry to fix the problem. In fact, he joked about it today. Watch.
If we'd been better mind readers, I guess we could have, but we moved as quickly as the problem became apparent to us.
A mind reader? I mean, what does this got to do about mind reading? I mean, this is just basic 101 supply chain. There's nothing really hard to understand here, Rich. Like you say, you take off nearly 50% of the manufacturing capacity, you're going to have a problem. They did not see it coming, and that's their job. I'm sorry, that's their job. My goodness. Talk about people that's going to die. This is going to hurt a lot of people. Hey, Rich, we got Katie Tubb coming up from the Heritage Foundation. We love Heritage Foundation here. And we're going to talk about, gas prices have hit a new high in all 50 states. All 50 states.
Yep.
Stay with us.
Promoting American industry. This is Made in America with Neil Asbury and Rich Rothman.
A very, very big welcome to you today for those just joining. And for those that's been with us, welcome back. Man, we just are getting started here. We have a great show for you today. Still a lot more to talk about. Rich, we got a guest on, from the Heritage Foundation. We love the Heritage Foundation. We've had a number of guests from the Heritage Foundation over the years, talking on a wide range of topics. And energy is one of their specialties. They got a lot of specialties. But we're very pleased to have with us right now Katie Tubb from the Heritage Foundation. Katie, welcome to Made in America.
No, thank you both for having me on.
So, Katie and Rich, the thing with energy and like every day it seems like we're hitting a new high in gas prices. I was just out in California, just returned, and gas was $6.50 or more a gallon, at least where I was. I just filled up in South Florida an hour ago, and it was $4.57 a gallon, so it's really jumped up. You've seen news reports this last week of changing the gas pumps so they can actually sell $10 an hour, $10 a gallon gas.
And that's never happened in the history.
Which is unfathomable.
Pumps.
I mean, I just can't imagine that people are actually getting us ready for $10 a gallon gasoline. I mean, it seems to go from bad to worse. And it's all Russia's fault, or they just don't have an answer at all. Let's listen to a quick soundbite, a very good soundbite here. And Katie, I'd like to get your reaction from Department of Energy Secretary Granholm. She had this to say this week.
One of the things to come up with is to electrify the transportation system so that we are not subject to the whims of petro dictators like Vladimir Putin. Let's just be clear about the reasons for these prices being elevated. It is because Russia was a great exporter of oil on a global market. And when countries like the United States and others rightfully said that we are not going to be funding Vladimir Putin's war and we're not going to accept any of those barrels, that pulled about 1.5 billion barrels per day off of the global market. When that happened, the president said, we are going to release 1 million barrels per day to try to stabilize the prices while we exhort our domestic oil and gas industry to increase supply.
So, Katie, I mean, they're doing everything except helping our energy segment increase supply. I mean, they're holding us back. Please respond.
Yeah, you know, it's hard for me to even know where to start with a clip like that because there's just so many misleading directions in what Secretary Granholm said. I'll start with electrifying transportation. That's just not an option for a lot of people. When you talk about the price of an electric vehicle versus a conventional vehicle. So I find that disheartening to hear that from the secretary, but it also ignores the fact that electricity prices have been increasing at a faster rate than they ever have since 2008. So I'm not sure that's affordable as a fuel either right now. You talk about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. You know, 1 million barrels per day sounds like a big number, but Americans consume 20 million barrels per day. So we're talking about a drop in the bucket here. And it all gets to that core issue of increasing supply. You know, draining our reserves is not fixing that core issue of increasing supply. And unfortunately, the administration has done everything in its power and has not changed course to address that supply problem. It's continued to march forward with regulations that I think will have a very damaging effect on the oil supply and natural gas for that matter.
Well, you know, what it really comes down to, from my point of view, when I listen to Granholm, Secretary Granholm, talking about this, and Pete Buttigieg talking about it earlier this year, is that they don't deal in the real time, Neil. They just and Kathy, they don't deal in the real world. They deal in the world of academia. I mean, not to say that Pete Buttigieg isn't smart. He's a Rhodes Scholar, for God's sakes. You know, he went to one of the schools I would love to have gone to. He's really well educated. But in the real world of dealing with problems in the real world and dealing with people who need to have solutions immediately, they don't know how to do that. They just don't know how to do that. And very often they don't even see the problem. And that's very, very worrisome to me. So when you hear President Biden get up on TV and others and, you know, his PR flags, Psaki, you know, they're saying, oh, well, he's dealing with it every day. We're doing everything possible to lower the price. And we're going to release 1 million barrels a day. Well, that's an optic. From my point of view and your point of view, I believe, is that this is merely an optic. So the average person really doesn't know. They have no idea. If we just pointed out that we use 20 million barrels a day, we're going to use 1 million barrels on that. We're going to take them from the strategic reserve. And what is it going to do? In reality, it does nothing. It doesn't do anything, but it sounds good. And that's all it really is. It's a sounding good moment.
Yeah, and, you know, I think it's a really good example of how the administration is talking out of both sides of their mouth. You know, they're trying to make it look like they're doing something, you know, by referencing the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. But when you look at their regulatory activities, they haven't pumped the brakes one bit on regulations for the oil, gas, and coal sectors that have the long-term view of phasing these industries out of the United States.
So, Kenny, but, you know, you mentioned about electric cars, and, you know, we're not ready for electric cars, and, you know, they would cost a lot of money. But also, doesn't electricity come from fossil fuels? I mean, it's like everybody buy a lot of electric, but where does the electric come from? I mean, it doesn't come from the heavens. It comes from fossil fuels largely. Isn't that correct?
Exactly. So we get our electricity in the United States from a variety of resources, but natural gas is the biggest component. And so all you have to do is look at natural gas prices to realize what is happening with electricity prices, which is increasing. I think that's.
But also coal, though, like Katie, but also coal, right? I mean, I don't know, what, 30-40% of the grid is coal? I mean, and look what they've done to decimate the coal industry.
Yep, exactly. And I guess that's, there's nothing wrong with electric vehicles competing in the open market. But when the administration is telling us what we ought to buy, I think that's where everyone should be very concerned, because we live in a representative government that enjoys a free market economy, rather than, I think, what the administration would prefer, which is an economy by executive fiat, in which case we all should be driving electric vehicles.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's exactly correct.
Hey, Katie, thanks for being on the show. I mean, we really appreciate having you with us. Katie Tubb from the Heritage Foundation. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Coming up, Dr. Rich and I still have a lot more to talk about. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're very, very happy with us. I'm Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Hey, Rich, I want to continue to follow up on what we were just talking about. Record gas prices in all 50 states, with the projection of $6 a gallon by the end of the summer by AAA. I mean, that's startling. $6 a gallon. I mean, who could believe that? But here we are. And the administration is just kind of stuck on this talking point that it's all Vladimir Putin, right? This was going on well before him. And by the way, we were an energy exporting country just up until recently. And President Biden, made sure that we weren't. We would be solving it, right? We would be kind of saying, okay, that's going on in the world, but here in America, we have all that we need.
Well, not only that, do we have all that we need? We had all that Europe needed, and we could have made it ridiculous for Putin to go into the Ukraine. He never would have done it. We could have bankrupted him. He wouldn't have any energy to sell because we would be selling it. But we did everything wrong. We shut our pipeline. We opened their pipeline. We shut down a secondary pipeline. We opened their pipeline. We encouraged Europe to get it from Russia. We actually bankrolled. President Biden actually signed the check that allowed Putin to have the money to have a war against Ukraine, which right now has cost this country almost $100 billion. That's unbelievable when you add up all the money that we've been putting into it. So I find that to be absolutely astounding that we allowed it to go in that direction. That is bad statesmanship.
Well, listen to Senator Josh Hawley. He's questioning Department of Energy Secretary Granholm this week on energy policy. Of course, she blames it on Russia. Let's listen.
Secretary Granholm, today in the state of Missouri, the average price of gasoline today, as of this morning, is $4.10. Average price of diesel is $5.18. And I'm sure you've seen the reporting this morning that now AAA is projecting that gas prices will hit a national average of $6 a gallon by the month of August. Is this acceptable to you?
No, it is not. And you can thank the activity of Vladimir Putin for invading Ukraine and pulling essentially those barrels.
With all due respect, Madam Secretary, that's utter nonsense.
I like it because she was just going off the talking points. She had no original thought whatsoever to
No, she
offer.
has no original thought. That's
she
the
had
problem.
she had no feeling. I mean, completely insincere about the pain and suffering that her administration is causing and her work is causing. Rich, bizarre.
No, well, they're all bizarre. And I think the problem, from my point of view, is that first of all, I don't even know if they want to solve it. Because if they can't recognize and admit what the problem is, and when you're going to solve a problem, you go, all right, we did this and that happened, so we have to fix this. That starting point we've got to fix. Got to do something different, and we'll get a better result. But if you won't even admit that what the problem was in the first place, as Granholm is saying, well, you got to blame Putin. Except, as Hawley points out, and if you listen to the whole thing, that 8 months earlier, the price of energy went up 30%. Why? Because Biden did everything wrong on day one. Within 4 hours of becoming the president, he shuts down the pipeline. He not only did he shut down the pipeline, he starts a secondary pipeline. He opens up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and he's telling the Federal Reserve and the banks, don't loan money to the people who want to invest in the fossil fuel industry. So then he takes more land off the market, and he increases regulations and everything the government has to have oversight in. And then he doesn't make it easy to get your permit. You can get a lease, but if you can't get a permit, and by the way, there are multiple permits that you have to have because you have to build infrastructure to get the oil out of the ground, ship it, do the whole thing, store it and everything. If you can't do that, then what's the point of making the investment? Now, if you don't admit what the problem was, but then if you can't even admit that the prices are high, how do you get anywhere? Why don't we listen to Senator Barrasso questioning Deborah Haaland, the Secretary of Interior, about high gas prices?
Madam Secretary, honest question. Do you believe that gas prices are too high?
Senator, I completely understand the crunch that so many Americans are under right now. I'm thinking back. I've been driving since I was about 18, so I know that we've had other, I remember back when there were lines out the gas stations and that kind of thing. I think that Americans are still recovering from this terrible pandemic, and there are a lot of other world events that are making things difficult for all of us.
So it sounds you're unwilling to say that gas prices are too high.
So, Rich, I think that that's part of it. I mean, Senator Barrasso, he hit the nail on the head. If the administration will not admit that there's a problem, or other than it was like completely out of their hands. Now, I do remember President Biden, before he was President Biden, when he was candidate Biden, telling us that, that Vladimir Putin was shaking in his boots with the thought that Biden would be elected.
Right.
Really
shaking in his boots. He's dancing. He's confusing dancing with shaking.
You can't even admit. Hey, Rich, we got to take a quick break. We're going to be right back, folks. Dr. Rich, Neil Asbury, we want to see you. Stay with us.
Our most vulnerable veterans are isolated at hospitals, and during their greatest time of need, their loved ones can have little or no contact with them. Imagine having to shelter in place forever. Learn how you can help at healvets.org. Help Heal Veterans, with the support of citizens like you, is making things better together. Learn more at healvets.org. This message is furnished by Help Heal Veterans, a not-for-profit organization.
Welcome to Made in America. This is Neil Asbury, together with my good friend and co-host, Dr. Rich Ruffin. So, Rich, unfortunately, we just got a few minutes left, but still a lot to go over. Some really great sound bites here to kind of sum up the week. We try to keep this on a more lighter note. And in that regard, we have a clip from Meet the Press from Democrat strategist Adrienne Elrod. And this is almost comical because she's saying that the Dems should embrace and run on Biden's success and economic agenda.
All of these successes that he's having.
This is absolutely incredible, man. We have just knocked it out of the park. This is comical. This is comical if it wasn't so terrible and sad about what's happening to the people that's impacted by this. Let's listen to Adrienne.
I also learned that, to the point that Eugene just made, if you embrace the Biden agenda, it's going to get you far. There's a lot to run on here. The economy is doing well. I realize inflation is an issue the Biden administration is trying to address, but we have record job growth under this administration. We have jobs that people actually want to be working in that are high wage and income earning jobs. There's a lot to be proud of, and there's a lot to talk about. And that's exactly what John Fetterman did, and he excelled in the Democratic primary.
Yeah.
That's
Wow,
unbelievable.
A lot to run on. Well, let's face it, John Fetterman was running in a Democrat primary. That's not.
Did he get any Republicans? Let me think. What's the word?
Did he get
no?
any? Well, more importantly, did he get any independents? And the guy who would have been the moderate, who I think would have been a much better choice, Connor Lamb, who won a very competitive district in Western Pennsylvania for the Democrats. I mean, it's a major accomplishment. A centrist. I mean, he got beaten down so hard. I mean, it was not even close.
What's amazing is that Fetterman had a stroke just before the election. He's in the hospital getting a pacemaker. The other guy's running around in sneakers trying to get elected in that current election that day. He loses dramatically. One of the biggest swings I've seen in years. Massive.
So
Massive.
I don't know if the Dems should be high-fiving on that or not. I guess time will tell. But I think the Republican Party right now should be feeling really good about Pennsylvania. Let's listen to Stuart Varney just kind of sum it up and be the counterpoint of what we just heard.
The country's reeling from one crisis to another, but the president takes no responsibility. His defenders say inflation, the border, the looming recession, not his fault. You will hear the expression, it's not on him. I disagree. A lot of what's going on is on him. He caved to the climate crowd and ended America's energy independence. These record-high gas and diesel prices are on him. He's always supported the open borders crowd, and look what we've got. Millions of illegals flooding the country since he took office. And when Title 42 is lifted, get ready for a new massive surge. The border crisis is on him. The baby formula shortage, that's on the incompetence of his administration. The FDA dropped the ball on reopening the Abbott plant. The stock market sell-off, your 401k is way down because of rising inflation, and inflation is on him.
Well, there it is. It's on him.
Well,
how could you run on that? I mean, this is not looking very, very good. And you seen, Rich, the poll that came out this week. Was it
NBC?
NBC.
Be clear on that.
He was
left wing.
39% overall approval rating. I mean, he's in the 30s on a left wing poll, with 33% of Democrats saying that the guy's hopeless. That the country is going in a terrible, terrible direction. I mean, he can't even convince his own party. Then you have Joe Manchin this week saying that he's been more frustrated with what's going on today than he has been throughout this whole Biden presidency. I mean, for him to say that he's more frustrated than ever, I mean, that means there's nothing getting done on his watch.
There's no question. And probably sentiment also. Hey, listen, with the time we have left, we need 16 seconds for this. Play number 13. Let's cue that up. NBC polling. You're going to love this one.
Many of these voters are focused on what's impacting their everyday lives at the gas pump and grocery stores, trying to buy baby formula. New NBC polling showing 75% of the country thinks we're heading in the wrong direction.
75% in the wrong direction.
I want to know who the 25% are.
Now, this Democrat strategist, I wonder if she want to run on that record. 75%, all this wonderful stuff she's talking about, 75% say you're smoking something, man. You're out of it.
These numbers are dismal, just dismal.
Well, Rich, unfortunately, we're out of time. But we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.